This video discusses raising a flock of dual-purpose chickens in order to fully utilize both aspects of a dual-purpose chicken to get both eggs and meat from a flock that repopulates itself and over time that acclimatizes or habituates itself to a specific piece of land or actions of or practices of rearing them. Though it's easy, it's a well thought out breeding maintenance program. I raise chickens and grow a garden and grains because I'm interested in knowing how to be self-sufficient and because they are good skills to know, and also just because it's interesting to know how people did things several generations ago. So there's a sort of historical interest. I also do this to have some greater measure of control over the foods that my family and I consume at an age of genetic tampering and of a chemical-reliant agricultural industry. Chemicals whose names we can hardly pronounce comprise a percentage of our foods that I'm growing uncomfortable with. And not that my ability to pronounce these chemicals makes them bad or good, but my ability to research the effects and side effects of each and every one, and to laboring myself reading volumes and volumes of scientific journals about the welfare or harm of said chemicals, each one arguing with the other about whether or not there is any benefit or detriment, only to find out in 20 years that half of them cause cancer or autism or something else. I think my time might be more enjoyably spent by pulling weeds from my garden or watching a chick being hatched from an egg. So, to be honest, I do have to say that I also do it because I enjoy being outside. So, I want to talk a little bit about my planned breeding program that I have. The idea is not independent of other projects that I'm working on at my property. Basically means that I'm going to be intentional about selecting traits and characteristics that I want to perpetuate in my flock. I do the very same thing with saving seeds. Let's say I want to grow some green beans, and that I want the green beans to be increasingly better and better crop each year. So year one, I go to my local feed and seed and buy a bag of seeds, green bean seeds, which are just beans. And year one, I plant the seeds in the spring, and I eagerly await. And some of them germinate, and some don't. And of the ones that germinate, some are really small, like this one. They just don't do well. And others are kind of average. They do okay. But other ones of this very same batch of seed do exceedingly well. They thrive. They love it. It happens to be exactly the conditions that they want. And of those that do well, some grow green beans in abundance, or they might grow great flavors, or they might have another trait that is very desirable to keep, like they keep well, or something else. I mean, you just have to think of some favorable quality. So those are the beans that you keep for the seeds for next year, so that those are the genetic parents of the bean. Or likely there will be half a dozen plants that just do genetically better. It's not going to be one parent, but several parent plants. But whatever it is, they happen to thrive in these conditions. The point is that those plants prove that whatever traits they had to set out with, whatever genetic code was inside them, were ideal for my specific soil type, my climate, the amount of sun they get, my watering habits or lack thereof, that they were better able to fight off pathogens, disease, and infestations of insects that are common in my area and that are likely to be there again year after year. Had the exact same bag of beans been planted 10 miles from here, some other set of plants might have excelled in that area. But these are the ones that made it here and thrived at my house. This is the same logic that I'm using, this green bean idea, for my chickens. These chicks right here already have the best traits that the flock has to offer. And every year, each new generation will be that much more well suited to my location. They'll be better able to withstand the diseases if I choose the ones that are not sickly. What it means for me is that I have to be intentional. I made most of these decisions long before I even bought my first chickens. I researched breeds. I wanted a dual-purpose breed. good for both meat and eggs. I wanted a large breed so that it would provide a good amount of meat, and because I have learned that it deals with the threat of fewer predators. I wanted a docile bird that would be good for children so that someday, hopefully, I can get kids to take over the chicken chores. But I knew I wanted buff Orpingtons based on everything I had read. I wanted a self-perpetuating flock who liked the beans, only needed to be purchased one time, and from then on they would continue the flock themselves by providing new baby chicks every year, replacing members that had died to predators, disease, old age, or from the culling that will occur. And I knew that I would selectively breed. What it meant for me was a little bit of data collection. So earlier I mentioned the isolation coop, which Acorn now uses to raise her first chicks. Here my niece and nephew are holding one of the hens who was in isolation at that time. It was called the isolation coop because this is where I would take one hen at a time and leave her in this smaller run for a set period of time. And I could gather information about how many eggs she laid per week, the size and quality of the eggs, and if they cooked up any better, etc. There was almost no difference in how they cooked up, but I still wanted to find out for myself. There were definitely differences in the sizes of eggs and slight differences in qualities overall, so it was good data to have. And by using the isolation coop, I was able to be sure who the eggs came from. Since we sell our eggs to a small but growing group of organically minded consumers, egg data is extremely important for us. Because there's a lot of competition out there, and I don't want to be the guy known as with the small eggs like the one at the top. So, given a set group of eggs, you continue to choose the traits that perpetuate the larger eggs so that maybe you get more customers. But it also meant that I would have to weigh my chickens periodically, and it's not a big deal for me, but I suspect that the chickens weren't too fond of it. But it was necessary to provide the much needed hard data that overall benefits the flock. But you get a box, basically, like this file box here with a lid on it, and two strings, or a string tied to each side, and this old piece of clothes hanger wire like this, bent at each side. And I bought a digital scale online for under $10, and it works great. And outside I hang the wire on a tree branch or something sturdy. So inside I'm going to use this shelf. Put the digital scale at the other end of the hook. And you could use something a little fancier, but this is just low cost, and it's what I had available. Then I go and catch each chicken one at a time. The timid ones are more difficult, but you get them. Gently I place them in the box, and I put the lid on very quickly. For some reason, once the lid is on the box, the chickens don't try to push it off very much, so I don't have to struggle to keep them from coming up out of the top. Because the holes are in the side, they focus their attention there, which is good. Hang the box on the scale and write down the results. Subtract the weight of the box, and there you go. In this case, my box weighs 1 pound and 2 ounces, so that is what I subtract from the readout of the digital scale. I used to use weight in pounds and ounces, but recently I started using pounds with a decimal because all of this data gets put on a worksheet because I'm a very visual person. And then it gets illustrated on a graph. And the decimal, it won't graph pounds and ounces. It'll graph 10.5 pounds or something like that. So what you're looking at is the weight plotting for my flock. On the far left is the weight for my primary rooster, Aragorn. On the far right is the weight for my secondary rooster, Adam, who you can see only had one reading. And in the middle, you have the hens. So when A generation was 24 weeks old, Adam weighed a full pound less than Aragorn. At that age, they were reaching maturity. I did not want 2 roosters for 7 hens, and I had decided ahead of time I was going to cull one of them. As you can see, I culled Adam. That's why there's no more readings. At the top 3 hens, you can see that there were consistently 3 that were always the largest. As it turned out, they also had the best egg production, and their eggs were larger. And placed here on the graph, you can see visually that they were the largest hens. and that they're consistently on the top. The next two hens down were pretty close behind the top three, but they proved themselves by going broody, and that's why the sharp decrease right here in their weight. Once they go broody, they lose a considerable amount of weight. At the very bottom, you have two that just never really took off, or it kind of hit a growth spurt. They were always at the bottom, but then they just kind of plateaued out and decided they were done growing. And you can see the sharp difference between the top three and the bottom two in weight. So it's good to have this. This is the information that's handy when you go out and you have to cull one of them, and you're going to have a chicken dinner. You have no questions about who's going to be culled. Again, you got these. You don't cull a girl that's going broody who's had previous weight recordings that are pretty high, staying close to the rest of the pack or the top of the pack, but didn't quite make it. So Acorn so far has proven to be an excellent mother, and I'm excited to see how well Abby does also. But that it is a very basic premise of having, it's very basic having a planned breeding program or a selective breeding program. It's not too difficult. You just have to figure out a way to collect the data you need to make the decisions necessary to ensure that the flock stays healthy year after year. So if weight is your issue, then, or something important to you, then you want to figure out a way to weigh them. If color, if you want to breed a certain color or a certain look, then you keep that. Most people, if they had dual purpose breeds and they were going to harvest a chicken, they walk outside, they get the biggest, plumpest one. In doing so, they remove that genetic strength from the flock. Contrary to that idea, I'm constantly taking the smallest bird, usually the smallest bird, from the flock for meat when I'm culling a chicken. In my flock, a rooster has only one purpose, and that's to fertilize the spring egg. Well, a secondary purpose of providing meat, but mostly just to fertilize the spring eggs. In the whole chicken calendar, everything has its time and place. Starting at the beginning of a year, when I usually only have one rooster at maturity. In January, February, and March, and even into April, for data collection for the hens, while the rooster protects the flock from late winter predators that might be hungry. But I collect data on egg size and frequency and quality, and I weigh my chickens during this time to track who is doing better. Usually by March, I already know who my breeders are going to be, but I'm always looking out for that April surprise just in case. And I usually have a hen or two go broody in April or at least by May, and that is what I'm looking for. That's why I like Buff Orpingtons. They're good about that where I live. But right here where I live, a rooster will always have a short lifespan because roosters crow and I have neighbors. Important to the breeding program and the calendar year associated with it is that the chicks we hatch in the spring, let's say hatched in May from April fertilized eggs, and the rooster by then is long gone, roughly half of those will be male. These male chicks will be reaching maturity around November when they start wanting to crow and spar and mate, and then this becomes a plentiful source of meat right around the holidays, so the chicken calendar hits me in the stomach right at a very opportune time. I won't cull them all at once, but I can cull from the weakest up, from weeks 20 to 36 roughly, until I'm left with the last male who becomes my spring breeder. If two males are exceptionally worthy for different reasons, I may want to split the flock. It all depends. Nothing is rigid. The plan is malleable but has parameters. So again, when the roosters are about 5 months old, I want to start weighing them because size, as I've mentioned, is a desirable trait. It means more meat. So I'll weigh them at 5 months. I'll weigh them again at 5.5 and maybe at 6 months. And I'll be able to see a trend, like a line on a graph. And I can make sure that there are no anomalies and get real and fair picture of who's really the biggest rooster. And during that same time, I'm observing behaviors while I'm out feeding them and interacting with the chickens to see if there are any that are aggressive to me, because if they're aggressive to me, they're likely going to be aggressive with kids, and I don't want that. I'll look to see if there are any that are sick or weak. And something I forgot to mention earlier, I'm going to breed for larger breast meat size, because one thing about heritage breeds is that they do not have as large breast meat as most of the commercial breeds do, which is not good, because there are a couple of my favorite recipes that are chicken breast specific. So I'm definitely going to be breeding for that, and I want to pick that up for my little flock. The breast meat's not terribly small, but it's smaller. If I can figure out a way to get quantitative data on breast meat size and make a graph out of it, I might post that in another video. The plan considers spring as the mating season for the flock, fall and winter as meat harvest for that season's males, and spring and summer as meat harvest for aging and unproductive hens. Egg production per hen still fluctuates by daylight hours, meaning it's going to be less in the wintertime. However, with new hens reaching egg-laying age right around November or December, there will not be a large overall drop in egg production. And egg quality continues to increase year over year because I select that trait to perpetuate. It's not rocket surgery. If the hens go broody at any other time of the year, I'll try to break them of their broodiness usually, because I won't have any fertilized eggs for them to sit on, because I culled the last rooster in March or April. And I go most of the calendar year without crowing or fertilized eggs. So, online I've been asked before about inbreeding chickens, because the same breeding program would not work for most mammals, but chickens are different in this regard. According to what I've read, they don't suffer negative effects of inbreeding unless you breed poor quality birds. So even if I have a good sized bird, a decent egg layer, if she's sick all the time or has some other undesirable trait that I suspect generations down the line might be really bad for the flock, then she probably will not be one of the ones who gets eggs hatched. So you have to look out for the flock as a whole and care for the whole flock maintenance. So this breeding program only attempts to explain how to keep a dual-purpose flock and constant eggs and meat year after year, all while minimizing the negative effects of a rooster to a few short months. It offers a way to make the flock better and better each year and more adapted to your land and climate and habits, and shows you how to do so with minimal financial inputs. It shows how to keep your flock self-perpetuating and how you can have hens at various ages and egg-laying stages without a costly incubator. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.